Hello everybody, my name is Zachary Cruz, and I'm here today to announce the launch of my new organization to end bullying across the country. My new organization is called WIN, which stands for We Isolate No One. I want to lead a national movement to bring isolated kids out of the shadows and help stop violence in schools and end school shootings. Kids see the hurt and the pain that bullying causes each and every day. We can't solve this problem with new rules or laws alone. We can't solve this problem with more teachers or more staff. We can't solve this problem by making it harder to buy guns. We can't solve this problem by giving guns to teachers. The only way to solve this problem is for kids to stand up and end bullying in our schools. My brother is Nikolas Cruz. He stands charged today with the murder of 17 students at Stoneman Douglas High School. I cannot stand here today and defend my brother or make excuses for him. His story is complicated, tragic, and can be told elsewhere. However, I can say very clearly today that our schools all across the country have ticking time bombs in them. Bullying leads to abuse and violence, and that leads to isolation. If we don't do something to bring isolated kids out of the shadows, if we don't do something to help those kids build relationships with each other and with adults and find ways to fit in, if we don't train kids to handle these problems when they see them every single day, then we can't be surprised when the next bomb goes off. We need to blow out the match before they light the fuse. Every day and every night, I think to myself how this could have been prevented, and it haunts me. Yet life is not about the past. Your life is about where you are and where you're going. Me, I've decided that it isn't too late to prevent the next Parkland, or the next Santa Fe, or the next Columbine. It isn't about blame anymore. It's about acting to save the lives of kids and their families. I am 18 years old, and I have my whole life ahead of me. I cannot sit by and watch another tragedy happen. I know very clearly that kids like me see acts of bullying, abuse, and isolation in their schools every single day. WIN, my foundation to end bullying, will provide a platform for kids to take a stand against bullying and bring kids out of the shadows and build positive places to learn. The way we will do this is twofold. First, the organization will sponsor student chapters in middle and high schools across the country. I'm the executive director of WIN, and the amazing people at Nexus Services have agreed to help fund our initiative. I will be working hard this summer to help create chapters in schools across the country in time for the next school year, which starts in most places in late August. We will train to spot bullying, abuse, and isolation, and how to intervene to head off the problem. While all of this work will be peer-to-peer, training will include how to recruit partners among adults to handle issues that may be larger than one person or one conflict. While it may seem like a lot for kids to handle, we are the ones who see this behavior. It can be hidden from teachers, but kids know. Since we know, it's our responsibility to make changes. The foundation will have local and state chapters. We are looking for state chapter presidents. If you are interested, and I hope you are, you can apply on our website. The organization will have a 24/7 hotline. Kids can call the hotline and report issues of bullying, abuse, and isolation. If WIN receives a call, that information will be shared with chapter members and leaderships, along with the school principal. Working hand in hand with Nexus CEO, a civil rights law firm, WIN will follow up to ensure that school leaders take the report seriously and act on them. At the end of the day, bullying and isolation of kids in our schools is a national crisis. Kids are literally dying. I know in my heart that the only way to make change is to empower kids to make changes. It is with this goal and this understanding and this central mission that I announce the formation of We Isolate No One, the Zachary Cruz Foundation to End Bullying. Visit weisolateNoone.com to learn more about WIN, and remember, our hotline to report bullying is 1-800-329-5507. Stand with us as kids across America stand up and act together to make sure we don't lose more kids to school violence. I will close with the words of Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mario Williams. I'm the president of Nexus Derechos Humanos. I'm here today, and I really thank everyone for coming out. I want to talk a little bit about the role that Nexus Derechos Humanos will play in this whole platform. One of the biggest problems with bullying in local schools, high schools, or whatever school is accountability. What Nexus Derechos Humanos is going to do, and it's a strategic alliance with Nexus Services, Inc., is start examining the role and liability and accountability of public school officials across the nation. And what does that mean? That means that the solution to bullying is simply not to take a person who bullied another person, whether physically or posting stuff on social media, and expelling them. The solution to bullying first starts with the ability to hold public school officials accountable legally and liable for not taking reasonable steps to ensure that they can eradicate bullying from their school system. So that means taking someone who actually bullies another person, bringing their parents into the fold, taking the victim of bullying, and actually examining the situation and trying to actually resolve the situation without penalty, which means I'm not just going to expel you, I'm going to look and see if this person really needs help. What type of help does this person really need? That does not happen currently because anybody familiar with the legal framework regarding bullying in schools, they absolutely know that they're immune from liability. All too often, parents across the United States of America go to teachers and principals and school officials, including countywide boards, complain about their son or daughter continuously being harassed, bullied, and nothing is done. And the reason why nothing is done and they can be blown off in this manner is because the legal framework insulates these officials from liability. We are going to start working with other lawyers around the country to examine these situations and make meaningful change in the legal framework that puts public school officials on notice that they will be held liable. Thank
you. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Zach. My name is Mike Donovan. I'm President and CEO of Nexus Services. We are the organization that funds Nexus Derechos Humanos, and we are the organization that sought to help Zach when he was in custody in Broward County. We had made a determination that we would fund civil litigation on his behalf, and that's how I first met him. And I want to take a few minutes just to talk about Zach. Because this kid is amazing, right? So when I first met him, I didn't really know what to expect. I knew that we had a person who had sought services. I knew that we had a person who likely had their constitutional rights violated. I knew that he had a case against Broward County. And of course, I knew what everybody knew. I think the first time I met Zach, I struggled to sort of understand how I could match this kid who's sort of, smiles and skates and, is incredibly caring and incredibly compassionate with this boogeyman that had been created in the community, not just in South Florida, but across the country as it related to this kid. And so in getting to know him, it became clear that South Florida was probably not going to be the place he could overcome these challenges. And so we decided to make an offer for him to come to Virginia. It wasn't necessarily about coming to Virginia as much as it was getting out of South Florida. And I remember when I talked to him, I offered him a job at our corporate campus, which is in Verona, about 2 hours outside of DC. And I offered him a maintenance job. And I'll never forget a conversation we had where he says to me at dinner, I think, I really want to do something about bullying, and I want to take my spare time and I want to focus on creating an organization, an initiative, he said. And he said, well, what do you want your initiative to do? And he said, well, I want it to actually make a difference. It has to actually work. So he said, well, tell me about it. And in talking to me, I've built organizations. I've seen initiatives succeed. I've seen initiatives fail. And where initiatives fail is in lack of planning and a lack of understanding exactly what an organization can do. Because you have to find a place where an organization can actually make a difference. You've got to find a place where you can actually move the needle. And he was very clear that he believed that peer-to-peer work, that putting kids in charge of building better communities and schools was critically important. And he convinced me. Not only did he convince me that that was the right thing to do, because relying on administration is failing. It's failing us, not just in Parkland, but all over the place. But he convinced me that kids want that opportunity, and it is our duty to empower them. And so he said, I want to create an organization that will empower kids to make a difference in their communities. And that's what WIN will do. I am incredibly proud of a kid who's been through more trauma in the last 6 months than I've ever been through in my lifetime. And I don't know how, going through a quarter of what he went through, he's able to stand in front of you today and talk about anything meaningful, much less using his time to develop an organization that I not only think can work, I think will work. And I think will make significant changes in how kids treat one another and in how we respond to bullying in this country. And so I have to take a step back and sort of share with all of you just how incredible this young man is. He's bright, he's practical, and he's committed to making a difference. He's informed by trauma, as we sometimes are, and he's determined to make a significant difference. And I don't know, I've worked with people who've been successful in initiatives, but I've never worked with anyone who has a basic understanding so clearly of what needs to be done. So what I'm excited about today is that WIN will actually begin making a difference right away. Zach's Foundation's toll-free hotline, the 24/7 anti-bullying hotline, is active now. And kids from all over the country can call that hotline and report instances of abuse and neglect and isolation in schools. And in doing so, WIN staff will analyze those complaints and forward action items and response requests to principals and school officials in the communities where those reports come from, with a deadline to act before referring those instances and those cases over to attorneys to determine what the appropriate action might be. The reality is that by doing this, we can ensure that kids today have a resource they didn't have yesterday, last month, last year. That today, kids can make a difference. And then, Zach is committed over the next 90 days, August isn't so far away, 60 days, I guess, to traveling the country and ensuring that each state has a chapter president, so that WIN will have a functioning operation in all 50 of the United States. And then, in August, when schools come back in session, that those state chapter presidents will organize WIN chapters in every high school, in every middle school in those states. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of schools, driven organizations ran by kids, motivated by kids' understanding of the problem, and focused on kids solving the problem. Using adult resources to help kids take charge of a problem that disproportionately affects them. I'll close by saying that when I met Zach, I thought we were suing another sheriff. We do that from time to time. So I didn't anticipate that we'd be starting a national initiative or supporting him in his vision. I didn't even know that vision existed when I first met him. But as a high school kid and a middle school kid, I suffered horrific bullying. And as an LGBT kid, that was very, very common, and unfortunately still is. I understand the desperate hopelessness and isolation that can come from being bullied. And I understand how it can affect different kids different ways. Some kids act out and they get into drugs and alcohol abuse, and their life takes a stark turn from what it could have been. That kid didn't shoot up a school, but the tragedy is still there. It may not be reported on the nightly news, but the reality is we've lost someone. And every life that that kid impacts is affected by that bullying, or the kid that decides, like I almost did, that it wasn't worth it anymore and took their own life. That kid, that life that could have been, is gone. And the people that cared about that child are forever affected. It isn't just about stopping the next Parkland or the next Santa Fe or the next Columbine. This isn't a crisis that bubbles up once a year. This is a crisis that happens every day. Every day, kids are making decisions to take their lives because they can't stand how they're being treated. We owe kids so much more. And if we don't get serious about fixing this problem, we're going to lose so many more kids to school violence, to suicide, to alcohol and drug abuse. Here's what I love about Zach's plan. He doesn't rely on us to do it. He relies on the kids that are affected, the kids that have skin in the game, the kids that have a stake. That's what's so brilliant about it. That's what's going to make it successful, and that's why I'm proud to be a supporter of it. Thank you all so much. We will open it up to questions if anyone has any questions for any of us.
Just a quick question
Sure.
about the hotline. The people answering the phone, who are they, and are they qualified to talk to kids who may feel like they're kind of on the edge?
Yeah, very good question. So we have hotline services that we provide that do intake services for people in disaffected or disadvantaged populations. Folks that need legal referral services, for example. The hotline personnel that will be answering the hotline are the same hotline personnel that take those legal referrals. So they have extensive training and understanding on how to deal with people in crisis, because the majority of the calls that they get are people in crisis. Obviously, they have done some additional training to deal with youth. We do sometimes get youth calls. We obviously are going to get a lot more youth calls as it relates to this hotline because it's very youth specific. And they have additional resources that they can provide kids in crisis to ensure that if a kid in crisis calls and says that they plan to hurt themselves or something like that, that we can actually ensure that services get to those folks and that the appropriate referrals get to those folks to serve them. So we have done a lot of work and that's been a lot of the pre-work that we've done in ensuring that the hotline folks are ready. But they're great people, very caring. Had an opportunity to chat with Zach yesterday with the hotline personnel, and they're all motivated to do this work. Yes?
My name is Max Eden. I'm a senior fellow at Manhattan Institute. I really like what you were saying, Marty, about holding the adults accountable. That's something that some of the families out of Parkland are trying to do, and they're trying to understand what happened at the school before this happened. We've been trying to get in touch with you, Zachary, thus far unsuccessfully. So we'd just like to be able to chat with you at some point what happened at the school beforehand.
Yeah, and you can obviously connect with him today so we can make sure we get information shared. Perfect. Yes?
Just that you alluded to the fact that in this equation are sometimes LGBT kids, and we all know that they are often subjected to bullying at greater numbers than others. Will the foundation and the telephone hotline people be informed of some of the special issues that might impact that particular subgroup?
Absolutely. In fact, many of the hotline workers work specifically with civil rights referrals related to LGBT cases. And so they already have training related to LGBT sensitive issues. But you're right, it's incredibly important to understand that the LGBT community is I want to say disproportionately impacted, but I think it's not so much because they're LGBT, but because of the isolation, right? And one of the things that we talked about as it related to Nick was how isolated Nick was, right? We see in the LGBT community a similar type of isolation that can occur. The issue is when kids feel like they're alone, right? That's a significant problem. And then that problem grows as the normal challenges of being a teenager, exist. One of the things that we really want to be able to promote with the organization is to have these chapters seek out kids that are isolated and bring them into community. Building community isn't perfect. You're never going to get rid of conflict. You're never going to get rid of cliques in high school. My God, I mean, that's what high school is, right? You're not going to get rid of that stuff. But if you have a certain group of kids that are looking out for isolated kids and bringing them in, maybe just bringing them into some group, but trying to find a way for those kids who've fallen through the cracks to connect, that's an incredibly powerful thing. That's why I think this is going to be successful, because that's the focus. Kids can actually solve this problem. Heretofore, we have not empowered them to do it. That's going to change. Yes?
Have you already formed some of these chapters already? I know you guys in your press release talk about that you're looking for people, but in the interim, do you already have people?
We don't have a president yet of any chapter. The state chapters that we think we're ready to move forward with are Maryland, Virginia, and Florida, where we think we have chapter presidents there. When we appoint, when those president or when those folks, organizers come on, we'll do press releases in those particular states to introduce those folks, because I think that's important. But those are the 3 states where we think we're ready. And when I say I think we're ready, it's completely a Zach call. So Zach meets with them and talks to them about what he thinks it's going to be, what he thinks their workload's going to be, talks to them about their ability to travel the state. That's one of the big deals, right? We've asked that people, that state chapter presidents be under 21 years of age. That was important to Zach because he felt like it was important for kids to be able to relate to the organizers in their states. So I'm sort of letting him take that on. And that's one of the things that he's going to be doing is traveling to meet with these folks and talk to potential organizers and leaders. But we have a limited amount of time, so we'll be doing that quickly. Yes?
I was wondering if you could talk a minute about the mediators and sort of what their role is and just who will be the mediators.
Yep. So peer-to-peer mediation is very successful, as we know, in school districts across the country. It's one of the most successful programs that work to bring kids into building community, right? And so what we want to do is, in a traditional sense, not so much, but a mediator is that person that looks for maybe an organizer within a school chapter that's responsible for finding people who are isolated and then finding resource teams, bringing a group of 3 or 4 kids together to say, hey, we're gonna intentionally intervene in what we think is an isolated kid situation. We're gonna bring this kid out to the movies. We're gonna have them sit with us at school. We're gonna engage with them in some way, and that's the role of the mediator in the school. The second role of the high school mediators is to go into middle schools. I told Zach and I, we were talking, and he said, I want a chapter in every school. And I said, okay, that's like 27. I want a chapter in every school. And I said, well, that's 27,000 high schools. That's a lot. So that's going to be a big order, but yeah, we can do it. And he says, no, I want a chapter in every middle school as well. Well, that's like hundreds of thousands of schools, right? So I did sort of that, non-youthful, idealistic approach at saying, I don't know if we can do that. That's a lot of people. And his response to me was, if we have chapters in high schools and those high schoolers go into middle schools, we can inspire chapters from those mediators working with middle school students. He said, I remember when I was in middle school and when high schoolers came and talked to us, we listened. And he's right. It's going to take some time, but the role of the mediators in the high school is also to reach out to middle school kids and get them ready, to be leaders in their high school organizations, and then also to start their own middle school chapters. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Who are your funders besides the law firm?
So right now, Nexus Services is the funding entity. We've committed to Zach that we're going to fund this organization until such time as he doesn't need us to anymore. So the organization is a corporate entity. It's organized as a nonprofit. It will be a 501c3. It's a 501c application pending entity. I anticipate that we'll be funding, and I'll be funding specifically, this organization as we go through the next 6 to 12 to 18 months. One of the big challenges of an organization growing is the funding. And all too often, it's hard for an organization to get to a place of actually being able to make a difference over a large area without funding. My decision to fund this initiative had everything to do with meeting this kid and understanding that there's something special about him, something special in a tragic way about everything that happened. And I think sometimes from the most horrific tragedies come solutions. And sometimes we just have to listen. I've decided to listen. I think this is a solution, and I want to be a part of it. I'm not in school anymore, so organizing high school chapters probably isn't my thing, but I can pay for it, so that's what I'm going to do.
And just as a quick follow-up, how big is your first year's budget?
We're looking at probably $800,000 to $1.2 million contributed to the growth of the organization. Understanding that many of the school chapters will be volunteer. Obviously, they're going to be volunteer chapters. We're going to do a great push to get partners in retail and in food service to agree to donate foods to youth meetings, so that maybe you can do pizza parties and those types of things. And one of the things that we're going to focus on is building those teams and partnerships with national partners, national food service partners and retail partners, so that we can roll out a plan for kids who start chapters to be able to say, okay, I'm going to do a pizza party as an organizing meeting, and I'm going to do a pizza party in January, and to know that they have the ability to do that. And then when we have to be able to back in funds to help support those initiatives. But there's a lot of this that can be done simply by, anyone who's built nonprofit organizations knows it's just about taking the time, right? So we're going to take the time to try to build those partnerships to be able to support youth organizations in the schools to be able to have the types of meetings and initiatives that will bring other kids in. Yes?
Can you talk just a little bit more about how you might go about holding schools responsible? Gentlemen, you said that you think that might be one of the goals of the organization. Is there something that they should be doing that they may not be doing now? And if you think they're doing something wrong, would you sue them?
So, good question. I think there's and I'll take a stab, and if you want to, I think there's a couple different answers to that. First and foremost, we have the organization of student chapters, right? So one of the things that we need to protect are students' rights to organize. So if we have school districts that want to discourage student organization, well, that's going to be an area that we're going to have to potentially have legal get involved, right? There is great case law related to the rights of students to organize. In fact, in the LGBT community, we've seen that, where LGBT gay straight alliances, for example, in the high schools, have been supported by the courts as a right that kids have to organize those groups. And so, we'll first focus on making sure that we protect the rights of kids to organize one chapters. And then the second thing is we want to build collaborations. There's no school district out there that has an intention to harm the kids in the school district. I mean, I don't think any of us believe that. The problem is that sometimes bureaucracies create, things begin to move like molasses, and people who are in positions to take reports, for example, and intercede, don't. Maybe the communication breaks down. Maybe there's so much that they get overwhelmed. Budgets get constrained, and so on and so forth. So I think that in those instances, the hope would be that we could work with a school district to say, okay, what's the challenge here? Why can't you, walk down to the high school and see if this kid is having a problem? Why is it that you can't follow up? Some of those basic questions. I think we want to be collaborative, right? But if necessary, obviously, litigation is something that's possible, and also public policy changes, as Mario talked about, so that parents can say to school boards and school divisions, "You're responsible." I mean, it's interesting because you see school boards and school divisions all the time holding kids and parents responsible, and I think it's important for parents and kids to hold their school divisions responsible.
The only thing that I would add to that is the exact same thing, really, is what you have on just from a legal perspective throughout the nation is a framework that basically says, hey, look, I can't stop a child from walking up to another child and punching that kid in the face. I can't stop a kid from going home and putting something up on social media, so why would I have to, as a public school official, be held liable for that type of conduct? That's the wrong perspective. The perspective is not that the first instance of bullying you can't interject or intercede or prevent, so therefore you should never be held liable. The issue is, and we all know this about bullying, is that it's continual. Nobody just says, well, today I'm going to bully this person and tomorrow I'm not. It's a continual issue. So then what happens? The next step is, does the public school system or the particular official take, this is a legal term, but everybody understands it, reasonable steps to take action to eliminate this issue with this particular person and going beyond that systemically? The only way you're going to attack that, and we all know this as adults, you start opening up an individual to liability, especially monetarily, things change quickly. So the only way you're going to get into that is to go to representatives and say, hey, look, this framework is wrong. We understand long-term policy. We're not trying to gut out a county's whole, all the money in the county for this particular issue. But this framework has to be readjusted so we can actually weed out school officials who are just unwilling to take these steps, who are unwilling to work collaboratively with parents, other students, to ensure that they are doing everything they can to eradicate bullying within their school. And that's a real big issue, and that's something, Mike is over Nexus Services Inc. He just told you he's dedicating $800,000 to $1.2 million. Part of that is just going to be to hire a couple of lawyers with Nexus Directors Humanos who just work on the legal framework of issues alone, whose whole job is dedicated state by state to coming up as to what are the pitfalls, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses of these frameworks in order that we can work together with representatives to create a framework that really promotes respect for human dignity and life. And that's what really bullying is about. It's respect for another person's dignity. And so with that said, I'll just pass it back to Mike.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Mario. Any other questions? Yes.
In the wake of the Florida shooting, most of the focus on organizing seemed to be about the firearm or the tool that was used in the shooting as opposed to the person. I would love if you could kind of talk about what was the motivation to have an organization be about sort of the social problem rather than the tool being used.
Yeah,
Great question.
it is a really good question. I'll say, and then Zach, if you want to chime in on that as well, I'll say this. There are a host of people out there on either side of the gun control issue. Constitutional rights are incredibly important. Individuals have a Second Amendment right, and people have a First Amendment right to organize to change that. So, what we really wanted to focus on was what Zach's vision was. And had Zach come to me with the same compassion and interest and said, I want to advocate for gun control, then I'd have supported him, even though I might not support the issue, because I support the kid, right? He's an amazing kid. But what he told me was, gun control is not going to solve this problem. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it's not going to solve the problem. The problem, at least not always, and not fully, because there are kids still killing themselves every day. There are kids that are isolated and that are turning to drugs and alcohol every day. And, take away the mass shooting aspect of this for just a moment. This issue is so much bigger than a headline about a horrible tragedy where everyone says, could this happen in my hometown? It is happening in your hometown. It may not be a mass shooting, but there are kids isolated, there are kids distraught, and there are kids literally killing themselves. And that's everywhere, in every community. And gun control isn't going to change that. Even if it is a good idea, it's not going to change it. We have to focus on things that are actually going to work. And that's why I'm proud to support Zach. Did you want to say anything on that? Okay. All right. I think we'll break. Thank you guys so much for coming. Really
Thanks a lot.
appreciate it.